Hello. We've decided, myself and Ellie from the M Word, we've decided that we would like to be able to just talk about topics as they come out um, through our daily work. We feel that is so much information that still needs to be put out there for parents and professionals alike. Um, and we're very keen to kind of slot a regular time slot for us to be able to offer this to you. So today we're just going to think about mental health for the parents and the professionals and the difficulties we have. Now, my background is in mental health nursing, but for the last 5 years, I've been working for the M Word as a mental health and autism nurse specialist. I'll let Ellie introduce herself because she's obviously knows her information far more so than me. Ellie?
Hi, thanks Lavinia. My name's Ellie and I am a SEND educational consultant for the M-Word CIC, and I have got a background in working in primary schools, particularly with children with additional needs, as well as settings that have been more rural based to very large settings as well, with a whole host of different individuals and their presentations and different needs.
So we were talking this morning about the fact that mental health really is a bit of a taboo subject. And the thing that I think would be a really good starting point is the 1920s, just to kind of give an understanding of how difficult this is. So in the 1920s, there was a gentleman who was a doctor by trade in America, and he got promoted to think about mental health and well-being within the public health arena. And in the space of 10 years, they fought really hard to say, actually, we need to consider early years, not just, a defined group of individuals, but also that education was a really important part for people who were supporting people who were mentally unwell, but also if we are educating ourselves around our mental and our physical care, we could be more proactive and as a consequence be more preventative, which all sounds great. And it is amazing how much they learnt and tried to foster as information gathering and then giving that information out in the space of 10 years. I suppose what really concerns me is that with regards to mental health in the UK, and to be fair, around the World Health Organization didn't actually start looking at mental health until 1980. So that's 60 years down the line, as it were. But here we are in 2025, so 105 years later, and we are still struggling to talk about mental health. And what Ellie and I want to talk to you today about is within schools. What's going wrong, Ellie? Help us out, because obviously your background really might lend us to understand why it's so difficult.
It is still a massively difficult area to kind of cover within schools. It is part of the national curriculum. It's partly covered across the PSHE based sort of learning in and out of schools. But it's still very, very limited in what is covered. It's kind of more of a generic support to introduce mental health as opposed to going any deeper. And then for those children or individuals, young people who are struggling with their own mental health, the actual support and understanding is really difficult to access. I think it's quite a hard topic for schools, and it's not necessarily that they hate talking about it, even though I think to professionals supporting individuals struggling with their mental health, it can look and feel that way. I think to parents of children and young people who are struggling with their mental health, it looks and feels that way. It looks and feels as though it's being neglected and not spoken about, not supported, and not dealt with in schools. But actually, I think there's quite a few different ongoing underlying reasons as to why it's almost not delved into enough, not supported enough, and is often misunderstood.
Okay, so if we take the template from the States in the 1920s about we've got to think about early years, we've got to think about education, and we've got to be proactive in order to be preventative. So if we just take that template, that suggests to me that actually we need to think about teachers going into training. So how much training do they get for mental health?
This is one of the really, really big, hot reasons why there is not enough support, not enough understanding. Most
Okay.
trained teachers who have accessed their training through university have had half a day, maybe tops of a day, of special educational needs training. That
Wow.
in itself is, yeah, a wow statistic. It's not much. Out of 3 years of study, you have half a day or one full day on special educational needs. That
Yeah.
covers the bare basics of neurodivergent profiles, ADHD, autism, but it doesn't even delve into them.
No.
Very, very basic. That's before you've covered learning disabilities, physical disabilities and support in a school and access to that, before you've touched on or looked at mental health and children who might be struggling with depression, anxiety. So when you take one day tops, often half a day that's kind of covered in terms of support for this, there is no way that any teaching staff member has got a full idea of trained knowledge, expertise, or experience to actually be able to support those children and young people to the best of their sort of ability, or in any kind of capacity that's the next level. They're not trained as mental health experts. They're not even trained in terms of looking out for initial signs of anxiety. Their focus is on how to teach, how to reach the academic sorts of sides of things, not how to
Which
handle.
is quite staggering, isn't it? Because how do you teach an anxious young person?
Yeah, that
So we're going to fall at that hurdle, aren't we?
Yeah, and that training is on academics. You don't have enough of a half day, full day training that covers SEND or mental health to support that. There's no training that teachers are having to support anxiety and trauma. Their
Right.
expertise are being in teaching. Your
Okay.
expertise lies in mental health. So there is that barrier to them being able to best support. And even though some staff may well be really, really meaningfully supportive to children and young people who might be struggling with their mental health, they often could downplay the potential needs that a child has due to misunderstanding and not quite knowing what to do. Which I
Okay,
suppose,
so then we've got staff who are having training once they're qualified. How much training do they get a year on mental health?
limited, and that will be down to a school's budget as to whether or not they're utilising their inset training staff days, which schools are entitled to. Normally 5 a year. Some settings might vary that very slightly, but across 5 settings, those topics are chosen within schools in terms of what they're training, often safeguarding, often in-house things or areas that need doing. There's not a lot of ongoing training that
Yeah.
specifically reaches mental health at all.
So we can't be preventative. We can't think about early years. And then we're constantly being reactive in once, post qualification. And there is no real ongoing training. And therefore, we're very dependent on people who have lived experience of poor mental health, or if you're lucky enough to have a very proactive mental health nurse coming into the schools to try and support. You and I attended a TAF meeting yesterday, and we talked about anxiety being the biggest barrier for our young person being able to attend school. And all they were talking about is, well, we're going to work even harder to try and get this young person back to school. And the young person could not even tolerate leaving the house. So they were having to try and get somebody to come in alongside, and they could only do that for 10 minutes. But still, the chatter was about well, we're going to keep on working harder to get them into school. When we asked about it, the local authority turned around, so correct me if I'm wrong, about, no, that comes under health.
But equally, it's a
So,
massive barrier to education. Without being correctly supported to access breaking down the barriers, a child or young person can't best access their education. And I suppose this ties into one of the other big wobbles that schools, provisions, local authorities, teaching staff have is this limit to resources. It's limited, like we've said, in terms of what training they get.
yeah,
Accessing that training due to funding is limited. There's not enough funds, there's not enough resources for teaching staff or even for these pupils to access further support from qualified trained professionals, to access even the network outside of the school, such as social workers, educational psychologists, specialist teacher services, any further sort of special educational needs support local authorities remit sort of area. There are loopholes, there's jump holes, there's meet this bit of criteria, you don't meet one bit, you're back at square one, there's constantly delays, there's waiting lists, and that's before you've even managed to reach the professionals such as CAMS mental health and access that. This is years and years and years down the line before you reach these places. The system is so restricted on resources, and then waiting lists for CAMS, as we know nationally, are incredibly long, and for a lot of young people who have neurodivergent presentations, CAMS do not cater for the level of support to best support neurodivergent profiles of children and young people. You could have a really, really well-meaning school who wants to put in whatever support they can, but they are bound and tied by limited resources, funding, and training.
so we've got very reactive, we've got very delayed resources available. As you and I both know, I've worked within CAMS, and the whole point the M word being set up was they're not able to support young neurodiverse people with their anxiety, and they insist it's all caused by school, therefore it's a school problem, not a CAMS problem. But then you have, like we had, this real determination that mental health has the word health tagged onto it, therefore it is not going to come out of an education public purse. But the thing that really frustrates me, again, like you do, it does for you, is that, and I can see where CAMS come from this, if you are the cause of anxiety, why are you shifting the blame onto another agent who could support a young person with their anxiety, send them back to you, and all you're going to do is a round robin yet again. We can support a young person, but then they go back to the same system. Why is nobody seeming to address that problem? Because that is a big problem, isn't it, with the mental health?
Yeah, and I think this lies higher than the issues that we've looked at in terms of the resources, the training. This lies even further up in those top sorts of policies, government kinds of guides of levels, whereby we're still being drip fed and schools are still being drip fed the pressures for academics, the pressures for test results, the pressures for schools, the pressures for the core subjects of English, maths, science, reading, writing. That level is driven so highly up there that mental health again gets lost amongst it, and accessing it then under education kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
No, it links straight back to this is a child's barrier to accessing their education. They need supporting in a gentle way, in the correct way that works for that particular individual, to break down the barriers to their education and be correctly supported. As well as that kind of policy and government that ties things up there in terms of the pressures. There's the drip fed beliefs as well that have not changed. And you say, you talked early on into our discussion today about the 1920s. We still live in very outdated beliefs.
We
Children
do.
need to be resilient. Children have to deal with stress. It's part of life. These ways that are being embedded without considering the wider picture, they create instantly an environment which looks completely at a negative picture on mental health. And there are far bigger struggles here if you are a neurodivergent child or individual who needs access to care and support to guide them through that. Those beliefs and comments that lie in those sorts of ways from higher above again, and are just continued to feed into how the schools then view on it, because it's society, definitely doesn't help.
No, and I think that the difficulty that we have with that is that whilst they are busy suggesting that children should learn to be more resilient, what they don't appreciate is that children have eyes and ears. They look around their peers and think, why are they not struggling, but I am? And these children generally are quite resilient. But what these adults do not appreciate is that the huge volume of anxiety, the demands on them to try and pick up speed where they see their peers seemingly do it, these children, these young people are having their resilience eroded. They
Massively.
were resilient, very resilient, but when you are combating, and it is combating, when you're combating all of these demands and pressures, and you are struggling because you haven't got the right support to help you with your identified needs, that means that the resilience gets to a point where it becomes broken. So it's unfair and very belittling for these people, these adults who should know better. I mean, for goodness sake, we're talking about education where professionals are supposed to be very academic, having gone, we're teaching others. Why does it not occur to them that these children had resilience, but the environment has eroded the resilience? There isn't anything left for these young people. And quite often, as you and I know, young people will mask profusely, sometimes for years, and then break when it gets to either secondary school or GCSEs or A levels. They're just like, I can't do anymore because
And
the mask slips.
this creates that ongoing bigger issue within mental health, because you've not captured it when support could have been intervened even earlier, and
Yeah.
it's gone bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think we're still a long way off of a change massively in terms of what is really
Okay.
going to make a difference.
So obviously this is never going to go away until people address the problem at the root cause. If you were to think about, in the last few minutes of this very short, because we don't want it to be long, we want it short and snappy, don't we? Something you can have in your tea break discussion. But if you were to think about how do we support the root cause, what would you feel as a teacher would really help the root cause? What do we need to be doing or thinking about?
Early intervention definitely lies as a big part of it, capturing those children who are struggling early on to access support in a timely manner before things become more and more difficult for that individual, and support needs to be even more complexly put in, which can be really difficult, as well as providing further training or access to those professionals such as mental health practitioners who are trained in supporting and having access to those teachers. Whilst I think more training would be really beneficial to support children and young people who are struggling, they are never going to be a qualified and trained mental health expert. Their expertise lie elsewhere, but there does need to be further support and guidance and training for them to be able to best support the children who are in their care on a day-to-day basis, as well as the ongoing building education and awareness around mental health, putting the word out there that it's not taboo, it's not got a stigma attached to it, because so many young people slip through the system, and so many parents are trying their best to support and demand for change. Some students are even voicing that they know the system needs to change, they've not been supported in the right way. All of that lies even further up underneath it all. We need changes to the system, we need changes to policies, we need changes to funding, we need changes to training, which is bigger decisions by people higher up.
The thing that I've always learned within my nursing is that we are too big and cumbersome with all our policies and procedures. And because of that, we've got directors making decisions about what we're going to look like as a service 5 years down the line. And you're like, but if it's rubbish now, it's going to be really rubbish 5 years down the line. And there are a lot of parents who are really getting quite frustrated and desperate in probably equal measures about, you're not listening to me, you infer that I'm fabricating and making this all up, it's all in my head. But the reality is that most parents are very loving, very caring, and they are very considerate of their child's mental health and physical health and well-being. But it seems to me that when you get to school, it's kind of like, well, that's it now. So I think there needs to be far more investment in, one, we are going to be proactive and preventative. And that means we need to do it as early as possible. But that also means that we see the parents as a very valuable and valued parter of information. And we don't just dismiss it because we know best. We take them very much on board as, okay, so you have concerns, that means we should really have concerns, and think about ways going forward. And I know that this will invite lots and lots and lots of reactions from people who watch this. Undoubtedly it will. But for now, at least this leads us to think about so many other topics that we can come back to and revisit. So what we're really saying is we need to be far more proactive. We need to be much early years, and we absolutely need parents on board as part of the team, as it were, the wider team supporting our young people's mental health, because otherwise it's just going to keep getting worse and no changes will be made, which is what we're seeing from 1920s to 2025, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. Completely agree.
Okay, that's it from Ellie and I. We did say it was going to be short and snappy. That's what we want. Hope you've enjoyed your tea break and listening. We will be back, of course, in the future with a few more hopefully exciting and interesting topics.